Hello everyone, welcome to the first edition of the For Women in Science Festival, organized by the Fondation L'Oréal and UNESCO, and broadcast today on 5 continents. My name is Annabelle Mandeng. I am your Master of Ceremony. I have the pleasure to have with me Alexandra Palt, Executive Vice President of the Fondation L'Oréal, and Shamila Nair-Bedouelle, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences of UNESCO. Alexandra.
Thank you, Annabelle. It is a great joy to welcome all of you to our For Women in Science Festival. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen how women scientists are essential when needing to respond to existential threats to our health, to society, to the planet. And still, women scientists meet tremendous obstacles in their careers and their research. Even if progress can be noticed, only 33% of researchers worldwide are women, according to the latest UNESCO report. This evolution is still too slow. Important barriers persist, and the glass ceiling remains a reality in research. Women's access to the highest level of responsibility and recognition is still rare. Since the creation of the Nobel Prize in 1901, women represent less than 4% of scientific Nobel Prize winners. The same situation can be seen regarding access to the most cutting-edge areas of research. In artificial intelligence, women make up only 22% of researchers. This is not just a problem for women. This is a problem for research. To be relevant, research has to be inclusive and needs all its talents to be mobilized. This situation is the result of systemic barriers, of unconscious bias, of self-censorship, but also of persistent sexism and discrimination at all stages of women scientists' careers. This is why the Fondation L'Oréal is working with UNESCO to support, promote, and highlight women in science. And with this first edition of the For Women in Science Festival, we also want to celebrate them and to show not only their breakthrough discoveries, but also their resilience.
Indeed, Alexandra, gender equality is at the heart of the mandate of UNESCO. The world needs science, and science needs women. And one way of doing this is to showcase exceptional women. And this is what UNESCO and the Fondation L'Oréal have been doing for the past 23 years. We are committed to showcasing exceptional women in science, to make their work and talent more visible, and to inspire younger generations to pursue scientific careers. Women are not only hesitating to choose a scientific career, they're also leaving science for lack of equal opportunity in the workplace. This is one finding of the UNESCO 2021 Science Report. While the pandemic has demonstrated the ingenuity of women researchers, several studies show that female scientists, particularly those with young children and those in early stages of their careers, are hardest hit by the pandemic. We need to change these trends, and we need to do it urgently. We need the models for women and girl scientists, and we need to put the spotlight on critically important scientific work done by female researchers across the world. 122 laureates, more than 3,800 female doctoral students, postdoctoral students have been supported and honored in 110 countries through the L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science program. UNESCO looks forward to carry out our joint work with the Fondation L'Oréal to further promote gender equality in science for current and future generations.
Thank you, Shamila, and thank you, Alexandra. And now, let me tell you what we have in store for you. The agenda for this festival is organized around regions to give voice to the international diversity of women scientists and to welcome you from all over the world. Across the event, you can meet 40+ extraordinary women STEM researchers, discuss their career journeys, and debate what holds women back and how to overcome biases and systematic inequalities. Indeed, resilience is something that these women scientists have in common. They have needed passion, but also courage, patience, and perseverance to stay the course to succeed. After today, you will be able to watch the replay of the festival content and more on this platform, don't hesitate to spread the word and share all these inspirational stories with your friends and families. And get everyone to vote for your favorite talks. Now, let's start right away with 2 inspiring examples of the extraordinary contribution of women to science.
Hello, my name is Sara Lara. I come from Colombia, South America. We all know that we are in the midst of an extinction crisis. Mother Earth is suffering like never before. Millions of species are suffering at the hand of one species, the human species. We also know that this problem is most severe where biodiversity is richest, in the tropics. For example, Colombia is home to almost 2,000 bird species, which is 3 times more than France. And yet, Colombia is losing an area of rainforest the size of Paris every 12 days. And deforestation rates are accelerating in recent years. I come from a small village called Cajibío, Cauca, in the high Andes of Colombia. And I'm proud to have indigenous heritage. This region is the treasure box of biodiversity and natural resources. But tragically, it has also been devastated by decades of conflict, violence, and its people have suffered immense losses. I was educated as a civil engineer in a period of time where conservation was very little talked about in my country. After seeing so much destruction, I saw the light and I realized that I have to help save nature. I put down my construction hat and I put on a pair of binoculars. I soon found out there was a spectacular species that is found nowhere else but in the high Andes of Colombia, called the yellow-eared parrot. 100 years ago, the yellow-eared parrot was reported as abundant across Colombian Andes. But in 1999, just 1 flock of 81 birds survived. It was listed as critical endangered on the IUCN Red List and on the verge of extinction. I made it my mission to help to save the species from extinction. First, we needed to understand the challenges of the species so we can most effectively act to counter those issues. So I put together a research team and established an NGO called Fundación Pro Aves to help manage the project. My team quickly found 2 major issues that were confronting the parrot. The first issue was the disappearance of the Quindío wax palm, the parrots nesting and where they feed. Without protection, these majestic trees were being cleared for cattle pastures. Not only that, but thousands were cut down each Easter. The palm fronds are sought after to be carried in Palm Sundays, a religious tradition in Colombia. And the second issue was the parrot's unusual behavior. Most types of birds are wary of humans, and for good reason. But the yellow-eared parrot was unusual because it trusts humans. Unfortunately, this made them easy to hunt for sport. To save the species from imminent extinction, we had to address all these threats. But where to begin? With so many challenges, I was so thankful that the community, especially local women, rallied to help my team, learning how special and just how desperate the situation was, it triggered a maternal response to help protect it. Hunting parrots and logging wax palms was banned. And soon the parrot and the palm were adopted as a local and regional emblem and symbol of pride. I also helped to create a network of 28 nature reserves to protect and restore habitat for the parrot and countless other species. Combined, these reserves cover an area almost three times the size of Paris. Lastly, we partnered with the Catholic Church in Colombia and environmental authorities to stop the cutting the palm, and within few years, the centuries-old tradition of procession with wax palm fronts became processions of wax palm seedlings that were proudly carried in pots and planted each Palm Sunday. So how did the parrot respond? Well, we were shocked. With the threats removed and the last colony started to breed with vengeance, raising 2 broods of 2 chicks each year. Soon the population was almost doubling in size every year. Those 81 individuals became, in 1999, over 3,000 individuals, spreading across the Andes. It was a great success. In an era when we are struggling to reverse the fate and so many endangered species are in danger, the recovery of the yellow-eared parrot offered us hope. But it didn't do this alone. At every step, women inspired me, and together we galvanized real change. There were just not mothers, but entrepreneurs, teachers, and future leaders. They stood up with us in creating a better world. With this experience, I saw the huge potential and a great need to train and empower women to inspire nature conservation and improve their livelihoods. This led me to establish an initiative, Women for Conservation, in 2004. My projects help establish women-led community networks around these nature reserves, supporting them with training workshops from entrepreneurship to being a reserve rangers, as well access to knowledge on environmental matters and providing access to especially family planning. One example is Nympha Carianil, who has shown tremendous personal commitment and sacrifice to protect a threatened rainforest in the heart of the Colombian Amazon. Nympha lost her son in January 2019 when he drowned in the river outside the reserve station. She then lost her husband, Rufino, who worked with her as a reserve ranger in May 2020 due to COVID. Rufino worked with Nympha together as a reserve ranger, and Nympha asked that she would be allowed to bury Rufino beside her son in the reserve. She continues to protect the rainforest with tremendous commitment and professionalism. She's doing this alone in the face of constant threats from hunters, loggers, and settlers who seek to destroy this area. Nympha is just one example of women's determination and strength and commitment for protecting nature. She shows us that women are a tremendous force for conservation. By acting together, we can overcome adversity and transform difficulties into opportunities. There are big challenges, and nature needs us more than ever. But as you can see, from the yellow-eared parrot, we can save a species from the edge of extinction. And despite tremendous adversity, the passion and determination of women, just like Nympha, can make all the difference for our communities and for our planet. And working together, nothing can stop us. Thank you.
Buenas noches. Mi nombre es Susana Fiorentino. Yo soy inmunóloga y oncóloga. Soy profesor titular de la Universidad Javeriana en Bogotá, Colombia. Y trabajo desde hace más de 15 años en la búsqueda de medicamentos contra el cáncer a partir de plantas. Actualmente soy además emprendedora y directora científica de la spin-off DreamBio. Hoy vengo a hablarles de la magia de los fitomedicamentos. La producción de medicamentos en los países de ingresos bajos es casi nula. Nuestra salud depende de lo que se investiga y se produce en los países industrializados. Un medicamento que tomo actualmente acá en Francia vale 40 euros. En Colombia, la misma dosis vale 102 euros. Es decir, más de 2 veces en un país en donde el salario básico es de 193 euros. Si bien el gobierno cubre este gasto, igual tiene que pagarlo a los distribuidores, entonces todos pierden. La mayoría de los medicamentos vienen de las plantas y América Latina es la región más biodiversa del planeta, con un conocimiento ancestral valioso y no produce la materia prima de ningún medicamento. En 2004 regresé a Colombia con la intención de combinar el conocimiento que había adquirido en Francia con esa riqueza de nuestros pueblos para hacer algo que uniera estas dos culturas. Para comenzar, visité un laboratorio de investigación en productos naturales en Francia para ver cómo llevaban a cabo el estudio de esta biodiversidad. Me impactó ver cómo recibían plantas de todo el mundo y de una forma sistemática secaban, extraían y estudiaban las diferentes mezclas, buscando la actividad biológica que querían. Voy a compartir con ustedes lo que aprendí en esta primera fase de exploración. Las plantas son un sistema complejo, con muchas moléculas que actúan independientemente, en diferente forma, pero que además actúan en sinergia. La concentración de cada una de ellas en la planta es tan baja que sus efectos secundarios colaterales, es decir, en la mezcla, están disminuidos los efectos y están en un equilibrio perfecto que evita la toxicidad. La farmacología moderna busca aislar las moléculas, identificar su actividad biológica, producirlas a gran escala y evaluar la toxicidad. El efecto de estas moléculas en los pacientes se evalúa luego en estudios clínicos controlados sobre pacientes que tienen la misma enfermedad. Estos desarrollos basados en el hecho de que una enfermedad corresponde a una alteración única y esto a un medicamento ha sido el pilar de la farmacología por muchos años. Sin embargo, esta aproximación toma mucho tiempo y mucha plata y ha sido liderada por la industria farmacéutica con poca participación de la academia. De hecho, el éxito de esta ruta de desarrollo ha sido muy bajo. En las últimas 4 décadas ha habido un bajo descubrimiento de nuevas medicinas y la investigación farmacéutica se ha volcado sobre la búsqueda de nuevos usos de las moléculas que ya están en el mercado. Varias razones están implicadas en la falla en el descubrimiento de nuevos medicamentos y una de ellas es ver la enfermedad como algo simple. Las enfermedades en términos generales son manifestaciones de alteraciones complejas que ocurren en el organismo y que han sido originadas por múltiples factores. La idea de tener un medicamento con un compuesto aislado no tiene mucho sentido, dado que, por ejemplo, en cáncer, aunque la manifestación sea un crecimiento incontrolado de las células, la heterogeneidad de las mismas es enorme. Si esto se une a que también están implicados factores genéticos, medioambientales y otros que favorecen un aumento de la inflamación crónica que está en el centro, uno se pregunta si lo mejor no es controlar estos elementos externos en paralelo con los tratamientos convencionales. En COVID pasa lo mismo. Después de que el virus entra, la principal causa de muerte es la inflamación, que es generada por una respuesta inmune exacerbada que destruye el pulmón. La terapia eficaz es entonces aquella que inhibe la replicación del virus, pero además disminuye la inflamación. La medicina tradicional parece tener en cuenta estos elementos complejos, pero además comunes en muchas enfermedades. Sin embargo, entender cuáles son sus componentes y por qué en algunos individuos actúa y en otros no ha sido un reto para la ciencia. Hoy, gracias a los avances de las ciencias básicas y de la computación, sabemos cuáles son las moléculas que hay en los remedios tradicionales y la combinación en la cual cada una de ellas tiene actividad biológica. Entendemos la complejidad de la población y de su enfermedad y sabemos cómo responden los individuos. Entonces podemos desarrollar una terapia compleja en una población compleja para que la mayoría respondan. Y con seguridad, con una menor toxicidad y un menor costo. El camino para el desarrollo de un fitomedicamento es igual al de una droga de síntesis. Seleccionamos la planta gracias al conocimiento tradicional que tenemos de ella, pero además decidimos que esa planta pueda ser cultivada para que sirva como fuente de fitomedicamento. Luego, evaluamos sus componentes y sus mecanismos de acción, escalamos y producimos el extracto óptimo, miramos su toxicidad y de nuevo, como dije antes, validamos su actividad en estudios clínicos en pacientes. Desarrollar esta tecnología nos ha tomado 17 años de trabajo y algunos millones de euros, pero hemos aprendido mucho y hoy podemos reproducirlo con un menor costo y no solo con una planta, sino con muchas otras que estamos estudiando ahora en nuestro grupo. ¿Cuáles son las ventajas de trabajar sobre la fitoterapia sin dejar de lado las aproximaciones de la medicina moderna? El medicamento es con seguridad menos tóxico, en tanto que los pacientes lo han tomado inmerso en las preparaciones de la planta. Su desarrollo integra el conocimiento moderno. No solo se benefician económicamente los que comercializan el medicamento, sino todos los participantes de la cadena de valor. Cada uno aporta y cada uno recibe. Los agricultores venden la materia prima parcialmente transformada y reciben beneficios de la comercialización del producto. La industria farmacéutica implementa nuevas tecnologías, genera empleo y nuevas líneas de negocio. La academia genera conocimiento y recibe regalías por la transferencia de este conocimiento. Y finalmente, los pacientes, quienes pueden tener acceso a nuevos medicamentos. Esta cadena de valor aporta en la construcción de una economía más sostenible basada en el uso de la biodiversidad. Siguiendo estas premisas, tenemos hoy un fitomedicamento que tiene un potencial enorme en el control de las enfermedades respiratorias. Acabamos recientemente de evaluarlo en un estudio clínico controlado en pacientes con COVID en Colombia y encontramos que podía disminuir algunos de los marcadores de inflamación y disminuir el tiempo de estadía en el hospital. Además, en el laboratorio encontramos que reduce la replicación del virus y disminuye algunas poblaciones de células en el pulmón que parecen ser las responsables del daño pulmonar. Esperamos encontrar el apoyo financiero para terminar su desarrollo y estudiar si al utilizarlo tempranamente, justo después del diagnóstico de la enfermedad, puede mejorar aún más la condición general de los pacientes con enfermedades respiratorias. Muchas personas han participado en estos trabajos en los últimos años, colegas y estudiantes a quienes doy el reconocimiento y las gracias por haberme acompañado en este camino de la farmacología moderna. La ciencia es un arte y ninguna de las dos podrá ser realizada por las máquinas del futuro. Lanzarse en carreras que giran alrededor de estos temas vale la pena. Mostrar que la ciencia puede aportar en la solución de problemas actuales y en la construcción de un mejor planeta para todos es un gran regalo que nos da la vida. Gracias.
I do believe that women are resilient by nature.
Curiosity, our creativity, and our affinity for collaboration.
I like to think of resilience as strength. And when you find something you love and you do something you love, you will find that strength.
being away from my family for nearly 10 years.
Female scientists are able to actually move on regardless of the challenges, obstacles.
Be resilient, be strong, be a woman in STEM.
We have seen in the COVID-19 epidemic how important trust in science is and how parts of the public can mistrust scientific data and new technologies. To discuss how to build trust in science and technology, please welcome on stage our next round table, including 2 laureates of the International L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science Awards.
Hello and welcome to this session discussing restoring trust in science and technology. Even as COVID-19 has made science an everyday topic across the world, it's also revealed how much mistrust in science there is and technology breakthroughs and the media that report on them. What are the driving forces of this mistrust and what needs to be done to restore public confidence? I'm Jeremy White, I'm Executive Editor at Wired UK, and I'm joined here by an extraordinary panel that we'll be asking questions of throughout the session. From my far right here, we have Shafi Goldwasser, co-founder and chief scientist at Duality Tech, director of the Simons Institute for the Theory of Computing at UC Berkeley. We've got Pauline Paterson, co-director of the Vaccine Confidence Project, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and then Rajaâ Cherkaoui, professor of nuclear physics, Mohammed V University of Rabat, and member of Hassan II Academy of Science and Technology, and finally Denise here next to me, Denise Dresser, writer, political scientist, and professor, Department of Political Science, the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de Mexico. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. First question we have is, what are the drivers of contemporary public mistrust in science and technology? And so, Pauline, if I may start with you, what are the key public concerns around vaccination? How does trust or distrust play a particular role?
Thank you. Yes, for vaccination programs to be successful, it really does depend on trust, confidence, not just in the vaccine. So is the vaccine safe? Is it effective? But also trust in their healthcare providers. So does your doctor have your best interest at heart? Is your doctor competent? Or the healthcare provider at giving you that vaccine, but also trust in the process, trust in the policy. So is the policy based on evidence? Do people have trust in the policies that are there? And that's really key. And what we found is we conducted a study at the Health Protection Research Unit in Immunisation, exploring parents' views of whether they would accept a vaccine or not. 90% said they would. So in the UK, for example, people are willing to be vaccinated when asked. But the reasons why they weren't so keen to get vaccinated was this concern around safety, concerns around effectiveness, or possibly not feeling at risk as well. So we don't just look at confidence, trust, but we also look at convenience. Is it somewhere that's easy to get to? Is it far away? Is it at a time that you can go get vaccinated? If you're working during the day, can you go in the evening, at the weekends? And also in terms of cost, but also complacency. So do you feel at risk of the disease? And we have seen that some people don't feel at risk of the disease because it does affect more vulnerable people, more elderly people. So the young, we've seen, are less likely to want to get vaccinated because they don't feel at risk.
How do you go about not alienating people, when encouraging people to get the vaccination, the jabs, but without alienating them? You're talking about making it convenient, but how do you, the people that don't want to have them, for example?
It's really important not to stigmatize those that aren't vaccinating, and it's really important to not say that they're not vaccinating because they're uneducated or they don't know enough, and we need to educate them. It's really important to figure out, why are they not vaccinating? Is the vaccine in a place where people can go? Is it convenient? Figuring out, talking to them, not just communicating out, but also engaging with people, figuring that out, and then addressing those issues.
It'd be interesting to see what has been the most successful efforts either of you have seen in fighting vaccine hesitancy.
Before I answer that specific question, I want to address some global trends that Russia is simply one more evidence of.
Right.
Have to do with declining trust worldwide, and this is measured by the recent Edelman poll on trust. Decline in trust in governments, decline in trust in the media, decline in trust in journalists, and I think this is fueled by two parallel phenomena. One has to do with the disillusionment with liberal democracy around the world because of inequality, because of the rise in poverty, because of failure to deliver. And you're seeing the rise of populists on the left and on the right that because of the particular way in which they govern, tend to provide a narrative whereby they have alternative facts. And people should trust in them as the embodiment of the people. And therefore, they tend to discredit data. And scientists are part of a data-driven group of society. So there's that political factor. And I think it also has to do with a second trend, which is the rise of social media as a way of conveying disinformation about vaccines, as a way of spreading conspiracy theories. And because of the distrust in traditional institutions, people are now getting their information via Twitter, via Facebook, and the hesitancy rises specifically from those sources of disinformation. Where are vaccines working well? Where is there more trust? In places where there's trust in government, where there's trust in science, where there's trust in institutions.
Rajaâ, that actually leads me to ask you a question, really. Even leaving aside this polarization here, but do policymakers, the politicians, trust science and research in your experience? Is this seems to be key for whether we're actually imparting trust through to the general public? If the policymakers and the lawmakers are brought on board, is this your experience in your field?
Yes, I think trust is mandatory to build a scientific project, and I can give my example. I am working in fundamental physics. So when in 1996, as the head of nuclear physics laboratory, I proposed to my minister that Morocco becomes a member of an international scientific collaboration. It's not easy for our country, so you have to give all arguments. You have to give also what benefits our country will have. And this is very, very important to have the confidence of our ministry. And when we have his agreement, after that, I can give some example. For example, yes, do. I show that first we will have a young researcher, PhD student or post, in high-level scientific. It's very, very important for our country. We will have technical transfer in our country. We will have innovative training. So all that is very important. And after that, the concrete results and positive results establish confidence until today. And despite the change of government, and this is very, very important.
Speaking of widening out to other areas as well, Shafi, I wanted to bring you in to talk about AI applications, something that's in the news a great deal over the last few years, but we use more and more AI applications every day. And this is an area that you work in specifically. So do people trust or mistrust algorithms, or should they mistrust algorithms?
Yeah, so in fact, it's a very good question. Because as we know, in the last 5 years or so, there's more and more talk about machine learning and AI methods being used in every aspect of life. And some of it are things we don't even think about twice. So the fact that we reroute traffic because we know where traffic is going. That has to do with the fact that we have a lot of data about traffic, and we have smart algorithms who tell us how to drive faster and safer. Similarly, about energy rerouting, and obviously everybody knows about medicine, that we have a lot more data about illnesses, about causes from all over the world, and if we collaborate and bring this data together, we can also learn insights about better pharmaceuticals and so forth. So AI has been there. It's because we now have more data and more computing power, we are able to actually take advantage of this data and using these AI techniques. And obviously that's a good thing. So it would be very unfortunate if because of mistrust, these algorithms are not employed. So I think part of the mistrust, not even touching on your earlier question, the other panelists, is because everything's happened so quickly.
Yeah.
It's even with the vaccine. If you think about it, some of the things that the anti-vaxxers say make sense to all of us. It's so fast. This vaccine was developed so quickly, and we're supposed to take it. And who knows? The point is that we have no time, and that's why we're doing it. So with AI, there's all these techniques. They're incredibly powerful. Language translation. The things. We know that we're using this. There are things we can do today. There are illnesses we can cure because we have all this available, and there's an amazing thirst to use it because it's so powerful. However, because it's quick, regulation lags, and not only regulation, even technologically, and this is things that I work on, you do have to pay attention. Is it accurate? How do you verify accuracy? Is it transparent? Why is a machine learning algorithm making one decision versus another, for example, in things like bail? Is it robust? So in other words, are there sort of outlier cases where this thing is brittle and it will break and it will affect people? Is it fair? There's a lot of use of this term fairness. In other words, if you have a lot of data about people, but you don't have a lot of data about minorities, and now you've changed the whole medical treatment, it might affect these minorities badly. So scientists, so it's more science, it's not less science. More science will fix these problems, in my opinion, because you pay attention to it, you make definitions, you come up with methods. But so I guess my point is, it would be really too bad not to trust because we won't be able to take advantage of what we can. There are legitimate reasons why people are hesitant because of the speed of the science is moving. But in my opinion, the way to fight it is to have more science. And education, obviously, and explanation to people that it's not somebody is always trying to take advantage of them.
Okay. Denise, let me bring you in here.
Yeah. I want to broaden this discussion because I think we're headed very quickly to a situation where you have incredible advances in technology, in AI, and then those raise all sorts of ethical issues. Absolutely. And issues about how does science intersect with democracy? Yes. Because those tools that scientists are in your part of the world very excited about at UC Berkeley, I'm beginning to see, as a comparativist, how those tools can be used by authoritarian governments and not for good purposes. I mean, you see the rise of AI for surveillance technology, and I think science it should not be only for the few. It needs to integrate policymakers, and there needs to be a debate about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. Even now in COVID, for example, what did we see? That Twitter, Facebook, that were platforms for the dissemination of incredibly valuable information also became tools for the spread of disinformation. And only a year and 9 months into the pandemic has Twitter started to move against those that were providing information that led people to vaccine hesitancy. Only now are they starting to remove accounts that were virulent spreaders of disinformation, Fox News being among them, for example. So I think there's a responsibility for corporations, for platforms and for the scientific community to bring in the ethical dimension, and also for policymakers, because we see the weaponization of science, the weaponization of artificial intelligence. And I think that raises significant questions for the scientific community and for those of us who are in the defense and promotion of democracy worldwide.
How do we actually combat that then? If we're talking about this disconnect between the science itself and what it can actually do, and then how it's implemented, those are two separate things. It's like almost trying to attribute whether fire is good or evil or not. And so, when we're talking in those terms, how do we actually go beyond the point of just saying AI is evil or AI is used for evil, or just and being able to educate the public and saying it's not science that's the problem, it's how it is used or who is using it that is the problem. How do we change those attitudes if the public perception is always bound up with how the science is actually used rather than what the science is?
I think in terms of vaccines, if I can add, so we conducted a study looking at disinformation around vaccines, and we did see that if someone is exposed to misinformation around COVID vaccine, they're more likely to decline vaccination. So there is that, but also, although people go to the internet and they go to social media, they don't necessarily trust it. So we can't blame social media for the reasons that people aren't vaccinating. And we also conducted sentiment analysis to look at what people are discussing around the COVID pandemic, for example, and most of it is neutral or positive towards public health. So the media do occasionally have headlines that make you worry and fear that most of information online is not credible, and worry that people are going to try and change your mind about things. But it's a real small minority, that disinformation. But also with the internet, with social media, people that can group that couldn't group before, and you can find information that will reinforce your pre-existing views. So if you're worried about something, you'll find someone else who's worried about it, and actually you can fall down that rabbit hole of getting into worry and fear.
But I think you're being very specific to the UK. If you look at examples around the world, and I'm not even talking about developing countries, look at what's happening in the United States, where it's not only that people receive bad information from the media, they are receiving bad information from elected officials, from governors who are vaccine reluctant, who don't want vaccine mandates, who keep insisting that these are not times, after more than a year of the pandemic, these are not times for masks, obligatory masks in public schools, for example. I think that the issue of bad leadership, not paying attention to science, I think we have to take into account what's happening in many other countries of the world. And if those countries aren't vaccinated, we're not going to be safe. So worldwide, globally speaking.
So we haven't just been doing studies in the UK, we've been doing global studies, and we did do a 19-country study where we looked at trust in information from government, and those that trusted were more likely to vaccinate. Yeah. But I think it's really important that policies are based on evidence, because people will be more likely to trust them. But I agree that these will be amplifying factors of distrust if your government are making decisions that aren't based on science.
Like, do you think we really should be looking at, this idea of politicians, taking science and perverting it in some way? Do you think we should be going back to basics in a way, showing the public what is science, so they can make their own distinction?
I think with the COVID pandemic and the urgency to eradicate it, everyone has forgotten that science needs time. Takes time, and this is very important. Indeed, the scientific process is well known and requires several steps. First of all, you give a hypothesis, you propose a model, and after that, you have to confirm this hypothesis by an experiment or an observation, and finally, the publication of the results and review by peers. So large publics and decision makers has to be aware of the time needed to ensure the outcome of science. I think it's very, very important. And with this pandemic, all people has forgotten that.
The late Stephen Hawking wrote, shortly before his death, that as a scientist at Cambridge University, he had lived in quote, an extraordinarily privileged bubble. Should scientists, therefore, really, I think, have more of a responsibility in addressing the concerns of real world outside of academia? Denise?
Absolutely. I'm an academic, but at the same time, I feel that my responsibility is to make very complex issues and academic jargon intelligible to the broader world so that people understand what's at stake. And I think these panels are useful. They would be more useful if we actually had politicians on them. Because, they are the ones making the decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, you are all incredible scientists, and I trust and value your work intrinsically. But there's a big gap between your world and the people who are making decisions on the basis of electoral political imperatives, keeping their party in power, winning an election, and they use science or abuse science or ignore science for their own purposes. I think it's important for the scientific community to know how to communicate to the broader public, to integrate their work or discuss it with policymakers, to develop the field of scientific journalism. For example, in the midst of the pandemic, the work that I found most useful was Ed Yong's incredible articles in The Atlantic explaining COVID to the broader world. He won a Pulitzer Prize for that. And I think in every country, you should really develop that field so that you can directly address the public and its concerns, oftentimes jumping over politicians who are distorting what you are doing and what you are saying.
Should scientists enter the political arena to stop this happening? Denise?
I want to take this opportunity to denounce something that is going on in my country, and I think is something that is happening elsewhere, which is the political persecution of scientists. Well, I think in those specific circumstances, science has to defend itself, and you need to forge an international community or coalition in defense of science, and for people to speak up and say, this is wrong. We have to build relationships across communities, scientists, academics, policymakers, media, journalists, etc., at a time when in some places, science is being applauded, and in others, it is being persecuted.
About public trust in science and does it matter, and what are the solutions that we can do? We've already touched on some of these solutions anyway. It was nice that this discussion is weaving between them all. But regarding media, which we've mentioned a couple of times here, and obviously I'm being a member of the media, it's interesting to me. Like, I'm always interested in, should we dumb down science in order to make it more understandable, more accessible? And at what point does simplification of this communication vulgarize science too much or degrade it too much? Is there a trade-off somewhere? Would you rather more people understood?
I saw that in France, that you have a master only on scientific mediation. And this is very important. And also, science is going very quickly. So international collaboration for each item is very important. We have to exchange, to have a relation between, no, we haven't to talk about Africa, Europe, America. No, we have to talk about a project. And we call all the experts in the world. And to explain after it, we have to have the project, but also to prepare us to communicate with decision maker. It is an exercise. It's not easy to communicate to the large public, and the large public is also these decision makers. It's very important.
And I think you have to shift towards just better communication, broader communication, clearer communication, and resources, governmental resources devoted to that communication.
I agree, but just to say something, you were asking about should journalists vulgarize or whatever. I mean, it's the wrong term, but I think it's no, there is no low. There's nothing low enough.
There's
So
no low bar.
No bar. So no, I'm joking, but I mean, you know, the mad scientist and going back to the future, wonderful character. It's good that there are these characters which are scientists and are sympathetic, which I guess the media can use, or cartoons of scientists. I think the more the better, because I think that scientists being viewed as friendly characters, even for children who are going to grow up to be the adults who either respect scientists or don't respect scientists, and that they're not, you know, nerds or people who are cannot communicate or are not sympathetic. Obviously, the media can have a big part in making scientists as characters, as a profession, more accessible, more desirable. I think actually media does a great job in documentary films now about science. There's a lot more understanding about phenomena, about climate, and that's a big service that media does.
What about, sorry, Pauline?
Yeah, I'd love to add, in the UK, we've got the UK Science Media Centre, and they say media will do the science better when science do the media better. So they bring together scientists and media, and it's a great network, great collaboration, because then if, as journalists, you will know, you're in a rush, you need to write your piece, you've only got 24 hours, I don't know how long you have. But and the Science Media Centre help kind of bring in the scientists and help us write press releases as well. And I think it works really well. And I think it's really important so that media doesn't sensationalize or try and grab the attention by having incorrect facts as well. So I do often talk to journalists, and it helps to clarify what is happening. And because sometimes people, even other scientists in other fields, don't understand what's happening, so they need to talk to someone who does.
That's a very good point. Do you think the media should be more ready to follow that example and not try and go for a binary answer?
So it's a very interesting question you asked about the media, but that's your profession. So being binary, you know, or sensational, or being decisive, sounds like a good strategy, right? But it might not be the only strategy. So provoking thought is another strategy. So I assume that it appeals to me, and my guess is that it appeals to a lot more people than media believes. So in other words, even about something very technical, you know, that you have an algorithm that makes recommendations, and you want to make it accountable. And then there's a question, are the algorithms today accountable? Can you, like a doctor, if he does a malpractice, you can sue him. Can you sue an algorithm? And maybe yes, maybe not. How do we make algorithms accountable? So by bringing up these questions, but not as an accusation, algorithms are not accountable. Let's not use algorithms. No, that's not the end. It's an interesting question. How do you make an algorithm accountable? Can it be done? So if media was able to provoke thought, wouldn't it be wonderful? I don't think it's an impossible task, but the easier task, of course, is to provoke sensationalism.
And I would agree with you, because I think media has also the responsibility of raising questions.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Right.
You know, at the intersection of science, technology, ethics. What are we going to do, for example, about the ethics of artificial wombs that are going to be down the road in 5 years? Or who gets to go to Mars? Who gets to live on Mars? I mean, should it just be private corporations that establish colonies, or is this the responsibility of governments, and is some regulation required? Just to put out 2 questions there. But there are so many more. And I think the media should be posing those questions as hypotheses, as exploratory issues, as food for thought.
Absolutely. I'd like to end this session. We've covered a lot of ground here today. So I want to leave you with some sort of takeaway from our distinguished panel, actually. So I think the best thing I can do is basically to ask you, if you had to choose one thing, what's at the top of your list for restoring public confidence in science? We've covered many different factors, but if you can only choose one, and I'm going to keep you to one, and you can agree with each other. I'm not asking you to choose different ones, but Shafi, we'll start with you. So, like what's at the top of your list to fix?
I think the media.
The media.
is to make the medium be less about sensation and more about exploration.
Excellent. Pauline.
I had 5 in my list, but if I was to choose one, I would go with engagement. Engagement with the public. Listen, don't assume, discuss, listen, engage. Really key.
Wonderful. Rajaâ.
I think scientific mediation.
Mediation.
To cultivate dialogue between large publics, decision makers, and scientists.
Wonderful. And lastly, Denise.
Making science intelligible, making it easy to understand, communicating better, and understanding that scientists do not work in isolation from politicians and from other members of society, and you do need further integration and collaboration and communication.
Wonderful. Thanks so much indeed. I'd like to thank our distinguished panel here. I'd like to thank the audience as well. Thank you for joining us in this session here on Restoring Trust in Science and Technology. Enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks again.
Just persevere and keep on going in your direction that you like. Find something that you like and stick to it and be the best at it.
Faire un métier qu'on aime. Et ce que je voulais, c'est des challenges, oser, agir, dépasser les barrières.
Resilience is certainly something that women in science need. I think science is a very challenging culture.
Significa hacer de la ciencia una forma de vida.
Standing up for those who are voiceless, who are trampled on, who are dispossessed.
Really never give up.
I am sure you're ready to continue with the For Women in Science Festival. Next up are 2 remarkable women working on water issues. Professor Marcia Barbosa and the environmental entrepreneur Ana Luisa Beserra.
My name is Marcia Barbosa, and I do love to collect curiosities. I am one of those people that navigate on the internet looking for animals, plants, communities that live in very difficult or different or out of my bubble conditions. And don't think that I start to collect curiosities thanks to the connectivity of the internet. When I was young, no computers by then, I look into encyclopedias, almanacs, everything telling me things that were out of my everyday life. And do you know why I collect curiosities? Because when I'm concentrate in solving problems with my equations, calculations, all of that, suddenly, from this network of curiosities, one appears and calls me with this mild voice, Marcia, Marcia, look to me. And suddenly, I understand the solution. You think I'm crazy, but I'm not alone, like the music. Maria Mayer was the 2nd woman to get the Nobel Prize of Physics. If now it's weird to have a woman physicist, by her time was unbelievable weird. The newspaper have the headlines, Mother of San Diego got the Nobel Prize, because the only thing a woman could do at that time was to be a mother and a wife. And do you know why she got the Nobel Prize? Because she unveiled a mystery. At that time, they knew at the nucleus of an atom, there are a certain number of protons that when it happens in nature, they're super hyper connect. 2, 8, 20. They are known as magic numbers. So she came and told the protons are organized in layers like shells, the shell model. And the shells, they have an inner shell with lower numbers, an external with more numbers and more numbers, when we fit one orbital like that, they would be perfect and connected. Do you know from where she got this idea? Not only from equations, not only for a library book and talk with super, hyper intelligent physicists. She got that for looking a ballroom of people valsing. When people valse, you have an inner circle in which everybody is spinning the same orbital, and each couple is spinning around like a spin in a proton. Then you go to an external, you have all this beautiful spinning exactly like the nucleus does. It's not that beautiful? And all that came for the fact that she had got this idea out of her box. Imagine now if you have a working place with very diverse type of people, each one carrying their own external box. How much discovery, innovation can come from that? I'm also a physicist, a theoretical physicist as Maria Mayer. But instead of looking to atoms, I look to molecules. Actually, I look to a single molecule, that's water. Water? Such a simple element. Water is nothing but simple. It has more than 70 behaviors in which water goes in the opposite direction of the other materials. Let me give you an example. When you freeze any material, decrease the temperature, the material gets more and more and more tight, occupying less volume, gets very dense, and sinks in its own liquid phase. But water, when you decrease the temperature, water just expands and then gets less dense, and as you know, ice floats into liquid water. And why that's so relevant? Because when winter comes and you start to freeze, water will freeze from the top to the bottom, leaving life possible so we can survive. So nowadays, when you go to outer space, everybody looks for ice because we hope that you are going to find some water underneath, or maybe in the past there was some water underneath. My research group looks also to anomalies of water, this weird behavior, but not bulk water. We look at confined water, at nano-confined water. So what we look is when you pick up water and you put it in nanotubes. To have an idea, a nanotube, take a hair, slicing in 70,000 times, slice, you get a nanotube. And you flow water inside the nanotube. And what water is going to do as flowing into the nanotube is that water is going to align and form this beautiful line and flow up to 1,000 times faster than would do if water at nanotubes would obey the normal physics laws. 1,000 times, people. We can create waves to have filters for water very fast with this so simple idea. But water also have a second thing that is funny. Water is a temperamental kind of molecule. It loves some materials like salt, but also hates other materials, that horrible organic materials that will cover your sofa. So when you split water in your sofa, they don't penetrate in the sofa. They just form these little bubbles that never will enter that horrible material for water. So one day, I was thinking, how can I combine flowing fast, good for filters, and having this love and hate for water? I was concentrating, simulations, equations. How can I handle that? So I can think about ways to solve the problem of lack of fresh water. As you might know, today in our planet, a number of people, 1 in each 6 people in the planet, live in places with super stress of water. What can I do to help on that? And when I was concentrating, in that network, remember my curiosity network, emerged a little answer to my question, emerged this beetle. This beetle lives in the Namibia desert, and it has in the back, if you focus, you're going to see little tubes. In the top of the tube, there is a material that loves water, but loves so badly water that transforms the water vapor from the morning in the desert in liquid water. And then, in the bottom part, there is a material that hates water, like your sofa. And then the water drops just fall, and the little beetle is just open its mouth and drink water. When I looked to that, I knew I have my answer. I have to build a beetle nanotube. A nanotube in which water will flow, but you have a part that loves water and a part that hates water. Let me do that. I went to computers, I did the simulations, but unfortunately, it didn't work that well. And the reason why it did work that well is that in the entrance was too narrow. So water vapor transformed into liquid water, but then was so happy to be in this part that loves water that would not go to the part in which the flow would be so badly. Then the beetle called me again, Marcia, look to me. And I looked to the beetle, and I realized that it does something very special. The beetle have a large area for collecting the water, but just a small area to drinking the water. And that's not a tube, that's a cone. So I create the beetle nanocone. And the beetle nanocone in the simulations were able to transform water vapor into liquid water, enter in the cone, flow, and get collected in the other side. This technology is until now evolving, and I hope a few years from now, I'm going to come back and show you a prototype. Meantime, if you want to innovate, collect curiosities. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Ana Luisa. I'm a Brazilian scientist and social entrepreneur. My work is focused on democratizing access to water and sanitation in the world through innovative and accessible technologies. I have already developed more than 5 technologies for sanitation, benefiting more than 13,000 people, and I'm internationally recognized for this work by institutions such as the UN, UNESCO, and MIT. Do you remember when you were a kid and you liked to ask questions about the why of everything? When I was a child, I liked to know the most random things. Why the sky is blue, and why glass is solid and transparent at the same time. I imagine that many of you have gone through this questioning phase as well. And it made me want to be a scientist when I grew up, to help solve a huge global problem. As I was growing up, I thought that I need to become an adult for my dream to happen. Up until 2013, when I was 15 years old, a multitude of events led me to realize my dream, or at least to start it earlier. For those who don't know, 2013 was the International Year for Water Cooperation. That same year, unrelated to this, I had to read at school a Brazilian book called Vidas Secas, or Dry Lives, published in 1938. The book tells the story of the suffering life of families living in arid rural areas of Brazil, in a struggle for survival, in an environment of great hunger and almost no water, which justifies the title. That book made me feel like I was there, watching the suffering of Fabiano's family closely. And curiously, a few days later, I saw a poster for the Young Scientist Award, the biggest Brazilian award for young scientists. It was the necessary push to understand that I could start being a scientist before reaching college and solve the problem of water access in rural areas. So I started researching on the internet what the problem really was and what I could do to solve it, considering that I didn't have many financial resources or support from research institutions. During my research, two things was very clear. First, the problem of 1938 has not changed much. It's the reality for millions of families around the world. And little is being done to address it. The second thing is that there were thousands of technologies for water treatment, but they fail in the main objective, to guarantee the independence of access to drinking water for families in isolated areas without access to running water and sewage collection. Then I decided to use the principle of physics and applying a technology what nature has been doing for thousands of years, water treatment using sunlight. Even in some places, they already fill the PET bottles with water and put in the sun to treat it. It's one of the methodology recommended by the World Health Organization in extreme cases. Yes, sunlight has ultraviolet and infrared radiation, which can kill microorganisms that live in water and cause disease. That's when the idea of Aqualuz was born, as a technology that only needs the sun to work. Of course, the first version was simple and not pretty, which added to the fact that I couldn't get support from any lab to test the technology. I couldn't win the prize. But the important thing was to take the initiative and start. I was the only one at my school who applied for the prize. Usually, students from attached-based school with laboratory support apply to this kind of prize. But nothing mattered to me. I was already so in love with what I created, knowing that Aqualuz had the potential to change the lives of millions of people, and I want to follow that journey to the end. I want to develop the technology and take it into the hands of those who need it most in Brazil and in the world. This was not going to be easy. In Brazil, scientists do not receive much support, and I could not find ways to produce and finance Aqualuz for those who need it most. I was still too shy and didn't have the courage to pitch and convince people of my technology potential. It was very frustrating, but I was still motivated to find a way. I went to another competition in 2013, where I needed 1 week of training, and the pitch resulted in me moving just my lips in the entire presentation with the rest of my body completely frozen. I even answered questions wrongly. I was just thinking, what am I going to answer? I did not train for this. For me, it was a completely failure. So much that I didn't even bother to go to the prize ceremony. But can you imagine what happened? I won second place. But of course, as I didn't show up, I missed everything. And I was like, wow, how was this even possible? I decided to continue and do my best to develop new prototypes in my backyard. I entered university 2 years later, at the age of 17 years old. There, with the help of a professor, I discovered the world of entrepreneurship and how I could use it to help people who suffer from not having access to water. Thus was born Sustainable Development and Water for All, STW. But things were not as simple as that. For one thing, I needed to pitch this project to get it funded. Whenever I tried to pitch my project to entrepreneurs looking for opportunities, I was judged to be too young and not taken seriously. I was determined to learn about how, in addition to being a scientist, I could be a leader and have a social impact startup that could change the world. So I worked at building confidence to get support, and I really wanted to get involved in as many opportunities for entrepreneurs as possible. So I faced my fear of talking to people and performing in public. Of course, at the beginning I didn't do well, but I used all possible experience to gradually improve its difficulty, from speech, gesture, intonation, and I believe it's been hundreds of times that I've performed. And if you think about it, when we're working on a topic with a lot of dedication, we become expert on that topic. I was realizing this and gained confidence when I presented. since there would hardly be anyone in those environments who knew more than I did on that subject. And if there were, it would be an excellent opportunity for me to collect feedback and improve my work. My intention there was not to be the best. It was to take advantage of it and become better. There was no reason to be afraid. Whatever the results, it would be a great learning experience. Now, although I've been diagnosed with social anxiety, every time I need to introduce myself, I manage to feel confidence and even seem like I'm a communicative person. This has contributed to convince several people and partners to believe in the potential of my work over the past few years. 6 years after the birth of Aqualuz in 2019, we managed to enter the market through the model where companies finance the distributions of a lot of Aqualuz to needed communities around them. Today, STW benefits more than 13,000 people. Aqualuz is a technology that treats water using only sunlight with a durability of 20 years and maintenance limited to cleaning with soap and water. Our next goal is to get support to produce the technology at scale, to reduce the price of Aqualuz, and to be able to distribute it around the world, reaching the places that need it most. It was a long journey, yes, very challenging. But as Simon Sinek once said, working hard for something we do not care about is called stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion. And on this passionate path, I found the courage to overcome my shyness and transform myself. I could even get on stage. It can even be difficult now. I'm still slightly shy and antisocial. But, you know, as STW grew, it attracted a lot of fantastic people and with a lot of diversity. And I became a leader in this process. I would like other women to do the same, to start with questions and grow into leading social enterprises. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can change the world. If you give you the courage you didn't know you had. Thank you.
Resilience is strength. Resilience is the ability to adapt, the ability to change in your field for what is relevant and what is needed for you to do as a woman.
There is a lot of challenges that we face as scientists, and especially women in science. And I think resilience is the only weapon that we can use to go through this journey and this battle.
That resilience I have faced on my life, and I am happy to say that I've overcome it most of the time.
Finding the mentors, finding people that will guide you and show you the ropes.
Not for 1 minute think that you do not belong to this field of science. We do.
The pandemic has sped up the progress of the digital revolution into all areas of everyday life. Yet, STEM remains a sector where women are systematically underrepresented. The speakers in our next roundtable will discuss what progress looks like for their countries and regions and how to achieve solutions to make STEM careers more inclusive.
Greetings from Paris and welcome to our panel on advancing women in STEM all around the world. I have today with me 4 speakers who are scientists, policymakers, and advocates who are representing diverse populations from all around the world. They will be providing us a report, an update on the narrative and status of women in STEM from their region, which ranges from Guatemala, the United States, France, Argentina, and South Africa. As for myself, my name is Juliana Chan. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Wild Type Media Group, and I'm also a science journalist. I'm very delighted to be a moderator for today. So I will be introducing our 4 speakers one by one, starting with, of course, Professor Karen Hallberg. She is a For Women in Science Laureate 2019 for Latin America. Hello, Professor Hallberg, welcome. She's a professor in physics at the Balseiro Institute in Argentina, and also the principal researcher at the Bariloche Atomic Center. Professor Hallberg, would you please share with us your journey and your work in using computing approaches to understand the physics of quantum matter, and perhaps a little bit on your work on ethics and social responsibility of scientists? Karen, please.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here in this very important subject, promoting women in STEM. As you said, I'm from Argentina. I live in the south of Argentina, in Patagonia. There's a research institution, and we do research there with my students. I also teach. But apart from my professional career in physics, as you mentioned, we're doing state-of-the-art numerical calculations and numerical codes to study the quantum behavior of matter using quantum information technology. I'm very interested in promoting women in science, also promoting other less advantaged groups of society in science.
Thank you, Professor Hallberg. Next, we have Professor Françoise Combe. She's a For Women in Science Laureate 2021, a most this year recent laureate. Congratulations. And you are an astrophysicist at the Paris Observatory and a professor at the Collège de France, where you have been the chair of galaxies and cosmology since 2014. Professor Combe, would you please share with us more about your work on galaxy formation and evolution, please?
Yes, I am doing research at Paris Observatory and observing galaxies and looking back in time to go to the Big Bang to know how the galaxies are forming at the beginning and forming the stars, in fact, that consist all the disk of galaxies. And of course, the stars are formed from the gas, so that we observed a lot of molecules, organic molecules in the interstellar space. They are forming a lot of stars, and that's why we are here with the sun and the earth. And about women in STEM, I am also promoting them. I have been in my career about 37 PhD students, and half of them are women. So
it's actually very great to hear that there's so many women in astrophysics. So thanks for the update. Moving on, we have Africa Flores, Severe Land Cover and Land Use Change Lead at the NASA Applied Science. So Africa, could you please share with us your journey that led you to move from Guatemala all the way to the University of Alabama in the United States?
I grew up in Guatemala, and I remember the stories of my parents and grandparents enjoying natural resources, clean water, playing in the rivers, fishing there, some luxuries that I didn't have in my hometown when I was growing up. That really drove my interest to study something that helped me to manage our natural resources, because in this very small piece of land, there is so much richness, but it's so badly managed. So that led me to study agronomy and the field of STEM. Over there, I discovered geographic information systems, and I started working with satellite data. And that's how I made the jump to the program Servir, in which our main goal is to build the capacity of countries around the world to use satellite data and air observations for environmental monitoring. I had the opportunity to go back to Guatemala and use AI and satellite data to forecast harmful algal blooms in one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, Lake Atitlan. No bias, because I am from Guatemala, but it is the most beautiful lake in the world.
Okay, last but not least, we have Ms. Ndoni Mcunu. Ndoni is a bilateral engagement lead for climate change at the Adaptation Research Alliance at South-North. So, and you're also pursuing your PhD at the Global Change Institute at Witwatersrand University in South Africa. But Ndoni, what I'm most interested in is the project that you started, Black Women in Science, a non-profit that you set up to support young Black women scientists. Would you please share a little bit about your main job, and then, of course, Black Women in Science, please?
So my main job is really looking at climate change and climate research and trying to see how we can move from the research into the actual action of these projects, be it water solutions, be it energy solutions, be it infrastructural solutions, but we really focus on how do we move into the action. And then, within that journey, I obviously started an organization called Black Women in Science, and this is because I saw that the higher I went in the academic ladder, the fewer people I saw that looked like me. And then I realized that there's actually a term for it called the leaking pipeline, meaning that we have women coming in as undergraduates or in high school going into undergraduate level, first first year of university or tertiary, and then you see them like disappearing somewhere when it comes to their postgraduate studies. And so I was more interested into why is that happening, and how do we make them stay in the system, and how do we retain them in that system?
Well, the leaky pipeline that you described in South Africa is certainly also present in Asia, where I'm from. So I guess we have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
Without further ado, I'm just going to go on to a very important question. I would like to find out from our 4 speakers, what is the situation like for scientists in your country, or perhaps more broadly, your region? And in the past 10 years, have you seen any changes or improvements for women in your field of research, either through more traditional career paths or non-traditional career paths? I know that's a very big question, but what I really am asking is, what have you seen in the last 10 years, and do you have anything good to report back to base today? Maybe we'll start with Karen.
I would like to be much more optimistic at this stage of evaluating the situation. I'm optimistic in the long run, but you know, a couple of years ago, UNESCO announced that less than 30% of the researchers worldwide in science were women. This number includes social sciences and humanistic sciences, so I would venture to say that women working researching in STEM are much less than that. I don't know the number because that hasn't been evaluated properly. But imagine I would just maybe we are, I think, less than 20% of researchers worldwide. I'm just guessing, but that must be the number. In Latin America, in Argentina, the situation is slightly better. For example, in Argentina, in physics, there are 30% students, women students who are studying physics, but then that number decreases very rapidly while the women continue in their careers. So this is a little bit worrying. This still has to change, it has to evolve. I'm optimistic because the numbers are increasing very gradually. So now we have maybe 30% plus of women. We have a positive slope, although the slope is quite flat still. There's a lot to do. And if we look at women working in, for example, quantum computing and quantum technologies and quantum science, which is my field, then it's much, much less than that. I say, in the conferences I participate, there are less than 5% women. So there's a lot to do, and I think it's great that we talk about this because I hope we can inspire other women to continue.
Well, thank you for telling us, and we will be talking about some ideas on how we can change that. Moving on, Africa, why don't you share with us what has it been like? I guess you can speak for both Guatemala and also the United States, because you've seen both countries.
Yes, exactly. I think that there has been significant advances, but there still remain main challenges to be addressed. There are more women studying STEM fields. I am in the field of earth system sciences, and you can see a lot of entry jobs as well, but one of the main issues is the leaking pipeline, maintaining and retaining women in these fields, and for them to occupy higher level positions. On the good side, I think that I have seen in these 10 years, which the field has advanced tremendously, I have to say, because we have never had as much data and information as we have today from satellites to monitor our world, and things are moving super fast. But also a very good change is that there had more and more networks of women that I didn't know that existed, and then they're just creating as we speak. We have Ladies on Lanza, Sister of SARS, and a lot of many other like Geo-Latinas, and that very strong networks that allow us to stick together and share experiences, learn from each other, and know that we are not alone, which is something very important, because many times, particularly in this field, you may feel that you do not belong. It's a boys' club out there. But with these networks, you realize that there are other women that are going through the same issues, and we also support each other at the academic level to promote our research as well.
Thanks, Africa. And moving on to Françoise, please tell us how it is like in Paris or France more broadly, or maybe you can even speak for the European region.
Well, in France at least, and European, it's a little different from the south and the north, you know. There is the Latin countries, Spain, Italy, France, which have a lot of women, well, at least in STEM, it's 30%, 35%. And the north, Anglo-Saxon, Germany, for instance, is much less. So there is some cultural facts about that. And for France, in the past, it was 35%, and we see that in the senior level now. But there is a worrying tendency in the last 10 years that to get a permanent position after having a PhD, then you have to wait more than before. Before it was 1 or 2 years, you had a postdoc for 2 years, and then you get a permanent position. So it was really favorable for women. And then now you obtain a permanent position at 6-7 years after your PhD. And this it means that you must be mobile to go to one place to the other and other countries. And this for women is very difficult because they want to settle down, to form a family and so on. And of course, men are more favorable. They can wait for a longer time. And in general, they don't abandon. So it's more competitive now for women, I think. And we see that already in the young people. It's less than 30%. And I think we have to react to that. But a more positive point is for the senior one. I think that before there was a strong glass ceiling, that there was no people, no women in director of institute or president of university and so on. It is now people are aware of that and are selecting more women at the high level. So, for instance, I can give an example. When I entered, there was no women at all in astrophysics, for instance, and now in STEM there is about 10% elected in academy. So it's a great progress in the last 10 years. There is also in college where there is a lot of selection also. But there is humanities and STEM, so it's 20%, much better. University president is 15% now. It's a real progress. And the director of Institute for CNRS is even 25%. So I think in the senior part, there is a positive tendency, and in the junior part, unfortunately, and that we have to react that and to solve this problem.
I have noticed too that the length of time between your PhD and a faculty position has actually lengthened in Asia as well. But 6 to 7 years seems like quite a long stretch. The point you brought up about positions becoming less permanent and more contract-based is also a worrying problem that I see in many parts of the world. Ndoni, how about South Africa?
So I think it's very similar to the trends that we have internationally, but obviously we're having a slower trend of growth in South Africa, and it goes back to access, it goes back to finances in my country, in the sense that it is a privilege to do a postgraduate studies, it is a privilege to go to university. Education is not free and very expensive. And so I think that on its own creates the inequality. And as Africa said, we tend to focus now as, okay, let's get our students from their high school, their primary school, into universities to study science, and then we leave them, and then they're left alone, and then it gets lonelier and lonelier, and the ones that are staying in the system are now getting discouraged. And so one thing that I've realized that the networking is very, very important. As an organization, if we provide our fellows with business training or communication training or writing training, they don't actually care about that. What they actually want is to be able to sit with someone and say, I'm really struggling to do this. How did you make it? And how do I get out of this, And so that's what they appreciate more, is sitting together and communicating together. And most importantly, I think the positive side of this is that they are now wanting to become mentors. They are now wanting to change the status quo. They are now wanting to have impact on the ground. And you don't have to kind of find them. They're kind of saying, I'm here. Is anyone listening to what I'm saying? And I think that is so great, because now you have a woman who want to stretch themselves outside of their science block that says sit in your lab and get out results and publish papers. And they're saying, wait a minute, I can't publish unless I feel that I belong here and I feel like I'm worthy to be here. So I would definitely say it's mentorship, it's wanting to be visible. It's also the networks that are coming in, that people are now wanting to become in networks and talk about their issues. And most importantly, it's about how they are realizing that they can actually have an influence to younger women.
So because you're currently in your graduate studies, do you feel well supported right now as a woman in science in your university?
I don't want to attack my university. No offense to my university. I feel like they're doing their best. But I think as working with the women that I work with right now, in my organization I've worked with like over 250 black women. And we're having a challenge of the science discipline itself, in the sense of it actually being designed for what the modern scientist wants. So the modern scientist wants to understand, where do I fit in the world? Can I start a business? Do I fit into a bigger picture? Can I communicate my research? When I communicate my research, does anyone care? Is anyone willing to invest? And they're not adjusting to these needs. And so then people are saying, oh, I just want to get into entrepreneurship and business. I don't think I want to get into science. I want to get into communication. And it's not that science is a bad industry. I think what they need to do as institutions is incorporate skills like communications, like writing, like, engaging, like, just changing the game a bit to fit into the changes around us and no longer just focusing on you have to publish to stay in sciences.
Many of these organizations are very good at supporting us in traditional academic career paths, right? But then are we able to support young scientists on non-traditional career paths? And you really mentioned something about what young scientists aspire to do, which is to spin off companies, start up, be founders and innovators, inventors, So does the Black Women in Science do that? Do you
Yes,
provide that
definitely.
resources?
Yeah, so our training specifically focuses on scientists that want to understand business. Where do they link up in business? Where do they link up in communications? And that is, for me, very important. So we focus on, if you have an idea, can you make it financial? If not, that's fine. But the fact that you want to think about something else, do it and really understand that. And the importance of this is that when you stand in front of people, you are able to communicate what you're doing, because you're no longer just speaking to the general scientific audience, but you're communicating to a broader audience.
Yeah, I mean, the commercialization of science is one aspect that I wish more scientists were taught in graduate school. I certainly wasn't, and I think it would be very helpful if we were given a crash course in that. Well, we definitely have a lot to wish for in terms of what we would need, and you've touched a lot of these topics, Ndoni. Maybe we'll start with Karen on this. What do you wish or hope for that your governments and your academic institutions can do to encourage, at the start of the pipeline, girls to enter scientific careers, and when they are already in scientific careers, how do we retain them and push them and help them along? Because we are seeing a very dramatic change in the way researchers do their research during the pandemic.
Well, thank you for that question, because I think it's one of the most important ones. What can we do to change the situation? I think we need a deep cultural change, and so the society and government and private entrepreneurs, that we should all be pushing towards this important cultural change. Science has, from the government, let's say, because since it was your question, science has to be much more open, it has to permeate more in the society. It has to be more present. We need a lot more scientific culture from the beginning, since they are in the kindergarten. The children should learn to think more. I mean, think what is called the critical thinking or scientific thinking. I don't like to call it scientific thinking, because it's not only related to science. To learn to think has to do. It's a skill you learn for the rest of your life, and it's very important that the young girls and boys, like they learn to ride a bike, they also learn to think, the abstract thinking, logical thinking, to be careful with magnitudes, even with lateral thinking, to be creative. So I mean, during their careers, I think it's very important to consider, for example, child care centers at the research institutions, because I have 2 children, and I had them at the beginning and at the end of my PhD, and I was able to continue with my career. I only stopped for 3 or 4 months with each child, because I had a child care center on campus. This was fundamental for me. I could breastfeed them, because it was very important for me to breastfeed them until they were a year old, while I could continue with my career without stopping or interrupting a scientific career is sort of a major disruption. So this should be avoided. And of course, I mean, that comes from the family, sharing with the partner, household and everything. The evaluation has to be flexible with women who are pursuing scientific careers. Of course, it shouldn't go in detriment of the scientific excellence or scientific response, but yes, it should be flexible. It should consider child care leave, or even maybe adult care. I mean, if we have elderly living at home with us. So I think this should be incorporated in the evaluations, again, without detriment of the scientific career. So this is one of the things that COVID left us. The other thing I think is very positive is the possibility of having hybrid conversations or hybrid or even long-distance conferences. Not only for women who have to take care of women or men, they have to take care with household duties, but also for us living in remote countries. It was very important for us, the possibility of being able to participate in conferences or in talks, seminars of people all around the world.
I cannot agree more, because we always think that you need some dramatic policy change, and sometimes you just need a childcare facility on campus, isn't it?
Yes.
But there are, of course, many things we can change from small to big, and more flexible policy performance evaluations would be very, very good start. Okay, thank you. And moving on, Africa, I'm very interested in your story because, in particular, you shared with me that you had a child during the pandemic, and that is a very unique experience, I must say, because you probably are balancing working from home, and you probably couldn't get as much help as you could because of social distancing. So, could you share with us? From the perspective of having had a child, what would you like to see different? Maybe in your case and also for everyone else.
Yes, I can attest how difficult the pandemic was for a young scientist or the middle career scientist that is at the stage of having kids. I have my second child during the pandemic, and childcare was closed, so we have our daughter, 3 years old, and a new baby, and we have to work. One of the maybe main things, I know that we are in the 21st century, but in the US particularly, it's necessary to have mandatory paid maternity and paternity leave. So to normalize that women can work, we don't have to feel that we have to choose between family and our career. And that's the position in which we are right now. And that's why in the tech industry and science, it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult. You feel that you have to choose. And by implementing these policies that maybe they are normal in other parts of the world, I think that is long needed for the US to implement this. Another thing is affordable and effective childcare, which also doesn't exist in that form in the US, because it makes it very difficult for women scientists to be a scientist. You know, you always feel like you have to be choosing between both careers.
I actually understand what you're speaking about, because I spent many years in the US as well, and I saw some of my colleagues who had kids, and it was very challenging for them. So what did you do if you weren't offered paid leave? Do you just take unpaid leave or sick leave?
It's unpaid leave. So because I had been working for such a long time, I was able to accumulate enough leave.
Like annual leave?
My annual leave, all my vacation, all the thing. And it's only 12 weeks. Actually, we have FMLA, so it only allows for 12 maximum. That's the maximum that you can take, which is unpaid. So I think that creates unequal conditions. And one thing, an additional thing I would like to mention is that gender equality in STEM is not about asking for privileges to women only and, you know, special conditions for us. For me, gender equality in STEM is a matter of human rights.
Exactly.
Because as a mother, you know, I have a completely supportive husband, but what if he would not be with us? And we actually, you know, we were completely vaccinated when we got COVID and nothing bad. But you have to be prepared to take care of your family. You're a working woman. And I should be allowed to take care of my own family if I am working, right? So that's why it is a matter of human rights. We are just asking for a just system. Just for justice, it's just a matter of that, and implementing these small changes that they are not that small because they have real implications of how we stay in the field are critical.
I feel you. I had 2 babies when I was an assistant professor in tenure track, and I had actually 4 months of maternity leave, and even then, I found it very difficult already. So I can only imagine if you had to take, you know, accumulate all your annual leave. And even then, it wasn't, you know, maternity leave that was was your right to, you know.
Yeah.
And moving on, Françoise, how can we make our workplaces more, you know, inclusive of women talents? I think this is all aspirational, but I think some of that you can already implement.
Yes, I agree very much with all Karen has said. And I think, well, for the job given to women, I think that we were discussing a moment ago about the postdoc and the long time to wait. I think that we could, at least the government could follow what is done in the US, for instance, where you have a tenure track, where you can be, well, it's not completely permanent, but at least it promises that after a few years you will have a permanent job, if you succeed, of course. At primary school, you have a cultural problem and stereotypes. When they are young, even before 10, that girls have these ideas in the mind that there are some jobs that are not done for girls, and we have to change that because it's not true. When you look at girls in studies, in universities, they are more successful. The exam, the end of studies are more successful. There are 55% to succeed and 45% of men. So they have more success in maths, in physics, and so on. But it's just after that they are going to another path, not engineer, because it's not a girl job. And as for the COVID, I think indeed young women, at least, not senior one, because it was even better for senior ones, but for young women who had children, in fact, it was very difficult. And the solution we had is to give them more time to finish their PhD, for instance. So we gave 1 year more, and it was accepted.
That's very good.
So, so at least, and it is also taken into account when you take a job to people, and there are competition with men. You have 1 year more for each child who have grown up. So this is taken into account. So even for awards or for any elections, we take that into account. So at least we are aware of the difficulties, and we take a solution for that. So for the COVID, I agree also that the Zoom meetings were very useful.
I remember many times I couldn't attend conferences because I had an infant. I had 2 children while I was in my tenure track. So that was a challenge for me. You know, Françoise, you talked about stereotypes in primary school, in books, in textbooks. I think the media has also a lot of role to play, because now I'm a science journalist and publisher. I can tell you, if you take a look at any of the TV shows and movies, or just like a stock photo library, it's always, you know, a male scientist and 2 assistants who are always female.
Yeah.
I think we have a huge part to play in this changing this narrative
It will
of
take
who
time.
is a scientist. You know. Thanks for sharing, Ndoni. What would you say you would like to see change in South Africa?
I think, you know, in as much as, you know, it was great to have Zoom meetings and have access to Zoom meetings, but majority of South Africans and Africans don't have access to data. And that's another conversation, that it becomes even more of the privilege to get data. And so once lockdown happened, our universities completely flipped, and now lecturers had to go online, but the students don't have data. How do they provide access to data so the students can learn online? Never mind data, laptops. You know, there's a huge, you know, different level of accessibility. So when I read one of the articles during COVID, it was around publishing and how it shows that women are publishing less in open-ended journals. So I support open-ended journals because I want people to have access. And so for me, it would be, how do we encourage women or incentivize women or universities, how do universities incentivize that women publish more, that women from developing countries publish more, and incentivize them by giving them data, by giving them time, by giving them a laptop, you know, and all of that is very important, because maybe little things that we might look at as a normal access, someone else doesn't have. And so even if someone is in as a woman scientist and they're told to go to a Zoom meeting as an African scientist, they might think this is too much work. I have to manage that my student doesn't have data right now, and they need to write the exam. And how will they write the exam? How do I monitor that? So I can't attend the Zoom invite that I'm being invited to. So how do you incentivize them and make sure that within these conferences that are online, we have representation within those conferences? It was much easier if you are walking down the corridor in university and you bump into a conference or something that's happening in a lecture room and you decide, oh wow, well, let me join, is it free? And you go in and you join. Now there are costs involved, there's data involved, there's laptops, there's technology, there's quality of, it's a lot. And it all comes down to access and affordability. And so for me, it's about how do we even ensure diversity within those Zooms? So if we are looking at how many participants were there, how many of them were from African countries or developing countries, or how many of them, were African, how many of them were Latin American, how do we ensure diversity and not think we're doing such a big impact, but we're actually just talking still, the higher elites are still just talking to each other, but it's now that they can just meet between China and America and, So for me, it's about access and are we really being sure about that within that access during COVID, are we still being fair to women and to African women and to, upcoming scientists and emerging scientists?
Very, very powerful words. Thank you very much, Ndoni. All right, I would like to thank our 4 speakers for their generous insights today. Clearly, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But fortunately, we have 4 of you leading your community and your country. So I thank the audience for your participation, and perhaps you could join me in giving our speakers a round of applause. Thank you. Thanks.
We are now coming to the end of the first edition of the For Women in Science Festival. I hope that, like me, you have been inspired by these fabulous women who are rocking the world of science. Let's hear once more from these women about what resilience means to them as women in science. Then I'll meet you again to conclude the festival with an interview between Audrey Azoulay, Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, and Jean-Paul Agon, Chairman of the Fondation L'Oréal.
Resilience is about being more like Avengers.
It is kind of a superpower. It's something that we need to fight all of the difficulties that we find in our way.
Women have so much power when they have the opportunity.
Resilience is to be able to do all what we can to pursue our dream.
Following your dream, following your passion.
Not pay attention to criticism.
Do not focus on what other people think about you, but what you think about yourself.
Our For Women in Science journey brings us back to those who graciously brought us together, UNESCO and the Fondation L'Oréal. I now have the pleasure to have with me Madame Audrey Azoulay, the Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and also Monsieur Jean-Paul Agon, the President of the Fondation L'Oréal. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madame Azoulay, UNESCO celebrated its 75th anniversary recently, and science was one of the highlights. So it seems now for the first For Women in Science Festival, science seems to be quite high on the political agenda, and it is also squarely in the public's eye. So how do you see the UNESCO contribution to science, and especially to women in science, which is called for by the 30 women scientists that are taking the stage today?
First, it's a pleasure to participate in this festival because the issues we are going to talk about and the issues raised by these women are structural, are fundamental. So here at UNESCO, you mentioned we've celebrated our 75th anniversary, and the science, the S in UNESCO, has always been at the core of the mandate. UNESCO was built and was imagined during the war, and with this idea that we needed science to build peace, we needed international cooperation in science, and also we needed to take more into account the social impact of science, and today I would say its ethical impact. And this has led to many initiatives of UNESCO in science during this history in terms of international cooperation on ocean science, on biodiversity, on major infrastructure like the CERN in Europe for nuclear research or the Sesame in the Middle East, things like that. But what we see today, and you were right to mention that science is very high on the agenda, is that most of the challenges we face need scientific response to deal with them. It's the case for, of course, the climate disruption, the loss of biodiversity, also the ethical impact of big data, of technology in our world. And for all this, we need more investment in science. And our number shows that there is not enough investment in science. But not only do we need more investment in science, we need a more inclusive science, and we need more women participation in science. And here again, the numbers are very bad. Despite all our efforts, today, when you look at the number of the proportion of women among researchers, it's only a third, more or less. And this number is not increasing, really, despite all our efforts. When you look at also the scientists, the professionals in the field of AI or of big data, it's around 20% only, 2022. And when you look at the composition of the academia, the scientific academia around the world, it's around 10%. So we have a real deficit of women in science, and we work here to try and to lift the barriers that still prevent women participation in science. We do it through education in the programs or to facilitate education for girls in STEM. And we do it for now, 23 years with L'Oréal in a fantastic program that promotes women in science by giving more visibility to exceptional female scientists, but also to support young researchers in their field across the globe. So we combine our strengths, those of L'Oréal and those of UNESCO, our networks, to encourage women into scientific careers. And this is something I think which is very important, and that we do across all our activities to try and have this gender equality dimension in everything we do. In science, it's very much needed. It's also needed in our normative instrument in science. We are discussing now in UNESCO an open science recommendation. The gender dimension is very important. Also another one on the ethics of artificial intelligence. Here again, we have an issue on that. But this program with L'Oréal has been a success, and we hear it from many of our laureates, to encourage and also to give hope and to give young women this impetus to go into science.
Monsieur Argon, the For Women in Science Festival gives a much needed forum now for the women scientists. They can introduce their discoveries, they can talk about their researches, but they can also share their thoughts about biases and also about the systematic discrimination that takes place in science and that stands in the way of gender balance in science. For you personally, what are the key messages that you take away, and also how do you see what actions need to be taken in the future that are crucial?
Yeah, there are several key messages, you're right. Well, number one is that this festival shows that these women scientists are just extraordinary. What we have seen today is really extraordinary. The quality, the level, the ambition of these women scientists is fantastic. And it confirms what Mrs. Azule said about the importance of women in science. Women scientists can really change the world. And we used to say that the world needs science and science needs women, and this is more true than ever. So that's the number one thing. It illustrates the importance of this battle. Number two, it shows also, as you said, that women are still really underrepresented in science, and it is just not acceptable. Why would we sacrifice, or why would we do without women in science? Women have to be in science, and they can bring absolutely a lot. And as you said, there is still many barriers, glass ceilings that limit their careers and their developments. So that's I think very important. And in terms of what the critical action for the future can be, I think that number one, as Mrs. Azoulay said, we need to give more visibility to these women scientists, because we need to inspire the next generation. You know, we need to make young girls attracted to science, young girls confident that they can be successful in a scientific career, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes they are afraid that it's not for them, that science is not for girls, so we have to encourage them. Number two, I think also that we have to unleash the potential of women scientists in new disciplines. You know, we have made progress thanks to the great program with UNESCO, the L'Oréal Foundation and UNESCO in the past 23 years. You know, we have had 122 laureates, we had 3,800 fellowships in 110 countries. So we made a lot of progress and developed the presence of women in science, but it has been mostly in some scientific disciplines like biomedicine, biology, all these sciences, but there is still a lot to be done in other disciplines like mathematics, physics, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and all these disciplines are super crucial for the future. So we need to stimulate women in this field. And to finish with, a different idea is that we think that we should also enroll men scientists, because by definition we cannot revolutionize science, and we cannot make sure that women are more integrated in the scientific world if men are not helping. It's true in science like it is in any other part of the society. So we have a program called Men for Women in Science, where we really try to motivate men to accept and develop and promote the careers of women in science. So it's a great program. We are very happy and proud to have this program developed with UNESCO, and we are sure that we are really contributing to a better science for tomorrow.
I hope so. It sounds like it. Thank you so much, Monsieur Argon. Thank you, Madame Azoulay, for these motivating, also open words. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, it is indeed up to us all to ensure a brighter future for women in science, because only if we reach gender balance in science can science fully respond to the ever-growing needs of people and the planet.